especially in professional venues. When I speak Italian, I tend to do that with a lot of English words. When I speak English with a lot of Italian words, usually at the restaurant, which is not where we are, so I thought that I should shortcomings. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to session number 3, where we investigate and we discuss the ethical implications of the interface of robotics and healthcare. And now we'll start with a couple of observations. The professional practice. When I was here last year, opportunity to participate in this wonderful works of this wonderful assembly. When I was here, I was listed as Dean, President, and CEO of the Research Institute of Houston Methodist Hospital, which is an emanation of the United Methodist Church. And frankly, not having any scholarly ground in the works such as today, when I got the call, I thought that perhaps in the spirit of ecumenism that informs this of course academy, I was called because there was a need for a Methodist. However, so I was very concerned that upon showing up here for the works of the academy, I would be kicked out of the Vatican for being a Catholic. A bit paradoxical, likely that did not happen, so I'm here with you again today, but no longer reduced to Methodist. I now serve in a Catholic university at the University of St. Thomas as Executive Vice President, and in the field of medical technology, and I believe in the words of healthcare. And I give you 2 examples that come from that perhaps have some pertinence to our discussion of today. And one is the fact that in year 2018, for the first time ever, a piece of software, lines of code, have been qualified as a drug by the Food and Drug Administrations of the United States. They have approval pathways as chemical elements, so biological molecules, to be approved as a drug. And for the first time, that is happened. So think for a moment of software as a drug, as a therapeutic agent for achieving health in people that suffer from a disease or a sickness. Is that in our hospital, now I'm speaking about Houston Methodist, as is the case in many other hospitals and many other institutions, they are not even hospitals. Now we have security helpers that are robots, the way we think of robots. They kind of look like things that come from Star Trek. These little guys, they walk around, they look like ghosts. They walk around, they make robotic sounds like beep, beep, which are not necessary. We just make them because it's an endearing thing. They kind of sound like the robot that you see, the good robots that you see in the movies. Security and safety for the hospital environment. I did not participate in the launch of that initiative, and I was a bit concerned with the fact that it would give a disquieting feeling to have robots that do security among us. But as I've noticed very quickly, within a few days, people, doctors, nurses, technicians, patients, technicians, started making friends with them. They will walk by them as the beep machine comes by and pat them on the head. And all of a sudden we have an emotional connection. So everything that you are thinking about in terms of the emotional disconnect with robots, forget about it. It's going to go away. It's going to go away very quickly. It's not even going to take a generation. Very, very quickly it's going to go away. But let's go back to what the robots are. The robotic arm, all the robots that you see in cartoons or in the movies, Transformers or whatever. But the mechanical implement, so the engineering, the technological implement, the arm or the piece of electronics, that's not really what brings up the majority of the ethical issues. Those are the interfaces that do something, they break, they make, they move, they modify, they transport. But when the ethical issues arise, the dominance of them at least, is in the software code, in the lines of code, right? It's all in the software, it's all in the computer program that runs them. And I can assure you that it is very, very, very simple and foreseeable that the code can be developed to make implements, robots, programs, devices feel more and more human. But whether they are or they feel like, of course, there is a big difference. And the big difference is the notion of agency. Can they make their own decisions? Of course, if you program them to respond with X when something Y happens, of course they are not making their own decisions. Or are they? Of course, they can be influenced by many factors. We can program into them the ability to respond to a certain stimulus, keeping into account a variety of environmental influences that change the answer. Or maybe a memory of a history of experiences that change. There is a counterpart to that in the human experience. It's called emotions. It's one of the greatest gifts from the Lord. Emotions help us do the process of deselection, which is much harder than the process of conscious thought. The vast majority of energy in the human body is spent to keep things out of cells. The same way our brain, the way it spends most of its energy, the way it works, is to make sure that we only consider at the conscious level a small fraction of all the incredible going on at the same time. So this selection is the key, and emotions are a tremendous way to do this selection in a way that our conscious does not even recognize and see. Can we build that into robotic programming? In many ways we can. It depends a lot on the computer power and the access to databases of experiences that lead to good or bad outcomes, whichever way we may define them. But here is the trick. As we are developing greater and greater power computers, the way these things are done is very transformative. All of a sudden, with the onset, with the advent of quantum computing, we are reaching into quantum processes, which by definition contain a non-deterministic part to the process. So all of a sudden, from the same set of starting points, and with the same set of boundary conditions, you can get different answers. You can get different answers that you cannot pre-program necessarily. Does that come anywhere near agency? I don't think so, but that is where a lot of the ethical issues, I think, really pertain. And we are not talking about errors. We are talking about the distribution. That is in many ways, from the stimulus X, a distribution wise, that in many ways is very similar to the way humans make their decision, regardless to how you are trained, in the same environment. They have the same experiences. You can even be genetically identical twins. Many times you respond differently, and that's what we call agency. Where the computer technology underlying this is really on its way, and in many ways it's already. So having said that, it is now my pleasure and delight to introduce, as our first speaker for the day, Professor Christiane Wolpen, who is a professor for ethics and theory of medicine at the University of Cologne, where she also serves as executive director of the Cologne Center for Ethics, Rights, Economics, and Social Sciences of Health. As well, she serves as the head of research at the unit in ethics and vice dean for academic development and gender, coordinator and leader of several international and national research projects concerning ethical aspects of reproductive medicine, neuroethics, quality of life, aging, genome editing, as well as head of society in the digital age. She is the former chair of the German Ethics Council and president of the 11th Global Summit of National Ethics and Bioethics Committees 2016. Among others, she was a member of the International Bioethics Committee of UNESCO until 2017, where she was appointed chair of the European Group of Ethics of Science and New Technologies, which advises the European Commission. In July 2018, she was appointed co-chair the newly established Ethics Commission of the German government. So, Dr. Wopen, it's a great privilege to be here with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this very friendly introduction, and thank you very much for having invited me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and I hope we can discuss a lot of important things. So big data, robotics, and algorithm-driven decision making and artificial intelligence are some of the buzzwords dominating the future of our societies. Technologies are transforming every area of society, such as work, we heard a lot of that, about that, communication, transport, commerce, culture, and also healthcare. In several respects, AI, and when I say AI, I mean robotics as well, because for the sake of my presentation, it's no sense to make a difference between robotics and AI. They hope for more well-being and welfare, and some say that it eventually helps to overcome poverty, suffering, and disease at all. I recommend on YouTube the video of Google, a video. It's called The Selfish Ledger. It's 9 minutes about the future of our data-driven societies. Humbler people talk of greater convenience in everyday life, major health benefits, and more efficient healthcare systems. Working here. Predictions of substantial economic gains unleash a furious dynamic within and between nations. For the healthcare sector of the USA, Accenture estimates that the value of Internet of Health things will top 163 billion US dollar by 2020, with a compound annual growth rate of more than 38% between 2015 and 2020. But there's also the other side of the coin. Robots and AI, to its fear, take away our jobs, leave a lot of people behind, discriminate against the poor and disadvantaged, and eventually destroy our democracies by fake news, hate speech, and deep fake. Again, the background of what is already said during this conference about the future of work, I want to recommend to you the EGE statement on future of work and future of society, which Emmanuel cited this morning, because that's what I want to say just at the beginning of my talk. A lot of problems that we discuss now are not problems that are rightly attributed to artificial intelligence and robotics. That are problems that we should have thought about since the beginning of humankind. Yeah? So in the EGE statement on future of work, we said that not the technologies are bringing these problems now on the table, but they are bringing it to our conscience and consciousness. So we learn now that we made a lot of things wrong in the past, and technologies show us that these problems are very strong ones that we now eventually should deal with. So the power of the new technologies seem to be great, even greater, and developing faster than every other revolutionary development, like the book printing or the steam engine before. Those who have the data and the technology. There are a few companies that have become quasi-monopolies meanwhile. So GAFA, or here it's another spelling, the 5 big tech companies, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft in 2018 had a market value of 3.8 trillion US dollar, almost double of the gross domestic product of Italy. All of them didn't start with a health-related product or service, but in the meantime, all of them engaged in the healthcare sector as well. There is a power shift pushed by economics. So it's now no longer mainly politics shaping our future and societies. It's a couple of countries in the US and in China. But do we want them to shape our world, or do we want to shape our world in democracies and on the basis of a deliberative process? So I think we should not allow companies to shape our world and our future. In ethical respects, a race to the bottom seems almost inevitable. On a global scale, some see an unregulated, economically driven US American approach according to the motto, ask for forgiveness, not for recognition. And the state-controlled Chinese approach on the other side of citizen surveillance and social scoring. Europe, by contrast, is on the way to positioning itself with an approach of ethical artificial intelligence based on fundamental rights and values. In this spirit, the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies, the EGE, as counseling body for the European Commission, launched a statement on artificial intelligence, robotics, and autonomous systems in March 2018. On wide-ranging and systematic public engagement and deliberation on the ethics of AI. That all of us decide how we want to live, but therefore we have to take the societies and have to take people with us. Secondly, it proposed a set of 9 basic principles and democratic prerequisites based on the fundamental values laid down in the EU treaties and in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. In the next minutes, I want to introduce these principles and to exemplarily point to their relevance and implications for health and healthcare. I will not distinguish robotics and artificial intelligence. So to have sort of an ideal healthcare and healthcare system in mind so that we can choose wisely, as was said yesterday, how to shape AI, that in an ideal world, a health system provides prevention and overcoming of illness and inequality with a tailor-made medicine for every individual, which is based on the findings of excellent basic and clinical research within the framework of a multi-professional health network adapted to individual needs, which is made up of brilliant representatives of different health professions who work in partnership with each other, as well as with informed, motivated, and self-determined patients in a highly efficient and solidarity-based health system and a thriving health industry. That's my dear world. So far, so good. How to get there? Let's first talk about human. As in the EU Charter, the EGE introduces this principle at the very beginning. It is understood as a recognition of the inherent human state of being worthy of respect and must not be violated by technologies. In the view of the EGE, this sets limits to classifications of an entire human being as is and will be made in China on a large scale, distributing living opportunities according to scores defined by the state. Sets limits to make a person an object of automated decision-making, especially when it is not informed. This is laid down in the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, but only if there are legal consequences for the person. I will come to a point where I think that is not yet enough. As an example from a specifically sensitive area of healthcare, I refer to an algorithm by Aspire Health, a company in Tennessee. They use an algorithm in order to predict whether a severely ill patient will die in 1 week, in half a year, or in 1 year. The algorithm identifies who will not benefit from a hospital stay and should rather stay at home if an unforeseen health event occurs. There is no transparency from the side of the company regarding the decision logic and the data used for the algorithmic output. We don't know whether Aspire Health, which is partly funded by Alphabet, the parent company of Google, takes into account the price of a hospital stay, and as far as it's written, the patient doesn't give informed consent to the use of the algorithm. We also don't know whether he can decide against. Thus, it could be that the use of this algorithm violates human dignity by scoring human beings and allocating life opportunities according to hidden economical interests. There's a similar algorithm acting just in the opposite way. Researchers at Stanford University developed an algorithm that assesses patients by evaluation of electronic patient records when they come to the hospital. They want to find out exclusively on the basis of medical data and not economical data, whether patients can benefit from palliative care, which usually is of the ecosystem around the algorithm, in which way it is programmed, trained, and used, which data are used, what purpose is being pursued, does the patient have a say? Another example from robotics. You see a situation without anyone else in the room, and guide you through the last moment on earth. I am sorry that your family and friends can't be with you right now, but don't be afraid. I am here to comfort you. You are not alone, you are with me. Your family and friends love you very much. It's nothing but an artistic installation, yet. But what the artist rightly wanted to provoke is thinking about the role of technologies in existential situations like that. The second principle is the one of autonomy. It refers to the freedom of the human being and his capability to act according to his values and beliefs, agency that was introduced in the beginning. In this sense, a car never will be autonomous, it will not happen. In healthcare, autonomy primarily implies that an individual has the right to consent to a medical intervention or to decline. Therefore, he has to be sufficiently informed about the kind of intervention and its possible beneficial or harmful consequences. This applies, for example, to digital monitoring systems for cardiovascular disease, a more autonomous and safe life, because there will be a signal, please take a break. When there can even be an emergency signal that, combined with location data, directly goes to a doctor so that he can easily find the collapsed patient. The principle of autonomy also refers to informational self-determination. Countries, while others, like Germany, desperately lag behind, allow patients to be informed about their health and their medical history, and to decide autonomously who can access which data, when, and why. Data sovereignty than mere informational self-determination. A data sovereign patient finds adequate institutions, such as data trustees, which allow him to donate data for research purposes. This can greatly strengthen autonomy. They are suicidal. In order to then inform friends, the police, or agencies knocking at his door, and the user cannot decline and not always meaningful human control over systems of robotics and artificial intelligence. Also, the autonomy of the doctor has to be protected. In the clinical decision support system, you see one there, please learn it by heart, recommends a drug for the treatment of a patient, and the doctor, together with the patient, comes to the well-founded decision that under the given circumstances, another drug is preferable. He should be allowed to follow that decision without being away from the beginning, that allows for human control and oversight, even if not everyone can understand all technical details of the system. The use of AI must serve the good and respect fundamental rights. This implies governance systems with an adequate regulatory combination of law, setting clear who is responsible for what. Let's take a learning healthcare system as an example. The US Institute of Medicine outlined this new conceptual approach in 2007 for the sake of combining clinical care and clinical research. The system shall learn from everyday practice. This is a methodological as well as profit from compulsory levies. Some key elements of such a learning healthcare system are, for example, clinical decision support systems that always connect, assess, use, and provide the current state of scientific knowledge. Electronic health records, which can be used across different health institutions, and ideally, the patients can also innovative models such as data donations or fiduciary data management are conceivable. You need a database networking and systemic evaluation, and last but not least, an understanding of clinical data as a public good. This is also the view of the International Robotics Committee of UNESCO in its report on big data and health, published in 2009 assumptions. Nevertheless, critically reflected correlations can give additional, they can provide important information which cannot be generated through clinical studies. Think, for example, of the effects of simultaneous intake of many drugs systematically not suitable for randomized double-blind clinical trials and are therefore structurally disadvantaged in terms of evidence-based progress in healthcare. Legally protected in a specific way, it rather depends on the context and the combination with other data. Income, for example, usually is not perceived as health data, but eventually can say a lot about your health together with the list of eligible purchases and the place of residence on the list of recently visited. What artificial intelligence can find out about a person? Michal Kosinski and his colleagues provide deeply irritating evidence on the performance of algorithms when evaluating just Facebook likes and nothing else. A computer-based, according to the famous Big Five model of personality, is as accurate as your spouse would judge you when it is based on not more than 300 Facebook. But by whom do we want to be seen and recognized as the personality we are and we have? By another human being watching him, he watching me, and to see who he is in a dialogic way, in an interactive way. And I do not want to be inferred by an anonymous algorithm, which is done mainly for the interest of companies and not for the interest of myself. There is even more unsettling. In a field experiment with more than 3.7 million people, researchers around Kosinski showed that individualized advertisement based on the or openness to experience, as two of the so-called Big Five, brought people to click on it up to 40% more often than those with not individualized ads, and to actually buy up to 50% more often than the control. Individualization of the advertisement was based on one and only one Facebook like, which according to a database correlates to specific personality features. This shows the possible consequences of personality judgments and individualized psychological mass manipulation. Obviously, as was shown, this works for business purposes. Perhaps it also works for political purposes beyond fake news, hate speech, and deep fake. Psychological microtargeting allows for true news and a loving speech. Nevertheless, it can deeply manipulate. This, in the hand of the wrong powers, is really bad news for our democracy. But perhaps it also works than changing patients' behavior. Think of smoking, alcohol, or drug addiction. Also, nutritional habits are a target for change in order to foster prevention of widespread diseases like diabetes or obesity. Is algorithmic psychological microtargeting the solution here? If used transparently, quality assessed, and with an informed consent of the individual, probably yes. If used to manipulate a person without consent, then it can turn out to be a violation of her autonomy and her privacy. The same applies to the increasingly upcoming algorithms that are meant to infer risk profiles based on behavioral data and health data from devices like smartwatches, or from pictures that you post on Instagram. Instagram, for example, intends to assess the risk to develop a depression Other tools of artificial intelligence and pattern recognition in a clinical context assess the risk for psychosis or dementia from brain images. As fascinating as the technical possibilities may be, and as much as man has always wanted oracles to predict his future, the consequences of the prediction must also be considered. Is the disease treatable or detrimental? Will there be a possibility to get life insurance after having a high risk? What about marrying and family? Thought out before the program. The EGE in its statement considers the right not to be profiled, measured, analyzed, coached, or nudged. What we can see here as well is the intrusion of hitherto not health-related companies into the health sector. These are the companies that have the data from social media, smart devices, and from the web. And they also have the technology to use the data. They also have privacy and the future of healthcare in the hands of private tech companies. 3 minutes? Well, I started at 3:15. Well, so Amazon running hospitals, diagnosing suicide prevention by Facebook, Google providing health insurance via internet with premiums adjusted to individual behavior, which is tracked comprehensively by smart devices. This refers to the next set of principles and solidarity. There are different kinds of healthcare systems in different states. We have a solidary system in Germany where 90% of all citizens enjoy equal access to all necessary and appropriate care. Digital technologies increasingly contribute to behavioral tracking and implementing corresponding system of benefits, or in other countries, even monetary incentives like reductions of the healthcare premium. To my mind, there are at least 3 systematic discriminations coming along with such behavioral-based insurance models. First, they discriminate against those who want to keep their privacy and who do not want to share their data. Second, such a system discriminates against those who are not able to meet the standards which are given by the company. An impaired person in a wheelchair cannot build a legendary need for our solidarity and should not suffer additional disadvantages. Third, there are those who just don't want to meet the standards because they believe in another kind of a flourishing life. Perhaps they want to help migrants, or to pray or meditate in the morning, which is probably a similar contribution to health than going to 10,000 steps a day, but it is not rewarded. Who gives insurance companies the right to define how we should live to lead a healthy life? I think they don't have it, and they shouldn't have it. There are further examples of discrimination by AI. A major problem is biases. Biases can have several causes, but I will not go into detail about that. Also not about security, safety, and bodily and mental integrity, only a few sentences, because clinical decision support systems that rely on raw data will, of course, impair the safety of people. And it leads to, the DGE differentiates 3 regards which have to be acknowledged: external safety for the environment and users of robotics and AI. Think of robotic assistance in surgery, we will hear about that, or in care. Reliability and internal robustness, e.g. against hacking. Think of electronic patient records or cardiac pacemakers. And emotional safety with respect to human-machine interaction. Think of robots in care for the elderly. So I will skip the sustainability principle, the democracy and the rule of law and accountability principle, and will come with a short final outcome. For the sake of that. Yeah. If we want to shape our future and our societies around fundamental rights and freedoms and the ethical principles just outlined here, and if we are aware that we do that in times where companies and some nations invest trillions of euros and dollars in robotics and AI in order to win the international competition for supremacy in future dominating technology, especially in the economically promising area of healthcare. Then we have first to be fast with regulation and with technology development and enablement. Second, to shape enabling institutional frameworks for ethical robotics and AI, such as data pools, partnerships and trustees, agencies for algorithm control and certifications, quality control, etc., not to block the development, but to enable it. And third, understand ethics not primarily as setting limits, but as shaping assets for flourishing individual lives and prospering societies. We have a lot talked about the machine-human interaction, and on a conference that was mentioned already today, AI for Good, in Geneva, the philosopher Francois Tabi said a wonderful sentence, and I will end with this sentence: the more machines can do, the more human we must become. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Buchmann, for this wonderful presentation. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Chris Gastmans, who is full professor of medical ethics and the head of the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Law at the Faculty of Medicine in Leuven. Since 2002, he is also member of the Bureau, as Secretary General 2002-2010, and then
more specifically in the field of aged care or elderly care. So first, the background is in all our societies, we are confronted with important demographic evolutions. That means that we are confronted with fast-growing older populations, and this has an important impact. For instance, also an important economic impact. Increasing care costs is the result, one of the results of the demographic evolution. At the same time, we are also confronted with a decreasing number of professional and non-professional caregivers. And that creates a tension where we have to deal with a challenge, namely how should we care for a growing older population in the future. Some people suggest that socially assisted robots can be part of the solution of this challenge. But what do we mean with socially assisted robots? Well, when we are talking about robots in aged care, we make a distinction between, on the one hand, assistive robots, like for instance, smart wheelchairs that you see on the slide, and on the other hand, the social robots. And in the field of the social robots, we make the distinction between companion robots, that are robots who just provide company to older adults, like the Paro, well-known Paro robot. And on the other hand, you have the socially assisted robots, like Zora and Pepper, produced in Belgium. So if we try to give a definition of socially assisted robots, and we call them SARS, to be a little bit more briefly. So SARS are embodied technologies that are used in a care context and that have a certain level of independence and an inherent programmed social capacity. And that can range from intentional movements to vocal capacity. And by using these capacities, these technologies can formulate expressions while they carry out assistive functions. And here you see also some other examples of socially assisted robots, the Care Robot 3 and the Compay robot. Another example is Alice, that is a Dutch robot, and we used Alice in qualitative empirical research, where I will give some results in a few minutes. What are the roles that socially assisted robots can play in aged care? Well, first they can have some help, or they can provide some help with physically challenging tasks, and we have seen that, for instance, also in the presentations yesterday. But they can also be part of a safety system. They can monitor the living atmosphere of older adults and are to detect faults. They can have also a cognitive support function, for instance, with remembering important things, for instance, with regard to medication intake. They can also entertain older adults by playing and by sharing the news of the day with the older people who are living at home, for instance. And they can also provide company with older adults. In that sense, they might decrease the loneliness or the feeling of loneliness of older people, social isolation, and even decrease the depression. When we look to the empirical and the philosophical ethical SARS, we see that the empirical studies focus on, for instance, how are SARS used in elderly care, what is the effectiveness of SARS, does it really has an impact on depression, for instance? How can the acceptance of SARS be, what are the attitudes of various stakeholders regarding SARS? When we look to the philosophy, with all these philosophical ethical argumentations regarding the use of SARS. But when we observe these literature, the philosophical literature and the empirical literature, then we see that there is a dichotomy between these two fields of literature. And that has important risks. Research alone, that means without thinking about philosophically about the results of empirical research, then there is a risk of ethical relativism. That means that there is some kind of as a presupposition that anything goes as long as no harm is involved. In that kind of literature, there is a risk that ethics is reduced to safety. But safety is not the only ethical issue. Course. On the other hand, doing philosophical ethical research alone, without being informed by empirical data, that has also a risk. That is the risk of ivory tower ethics. Because then you see many times some kind of a priori negative view, because people or philosophers are not really informed or inspired by, for instance, the list of the people who are confronted with these technologies. So what we need is a real dialogue between the empirical and the philosophical ethical studies with regard to SARS. And that is what we try to do in our research group in Leuven. SARS are already used in aged care, so it is very important to analyze the ethical impact of it. But for this, we should give attention to, for instance, older adults' lived experiences and their moral intuitions with regard to the use of SARS. And is needed in order to get rich insights. Let us look now to the philosophical ethical research. We did literature review of the philosophical ethical studies with regard to socially assistive robots in aged care, and we identified 28 publications that were published between 2002 and 2016. In these publications, we observed that most arguments regarding SARS or the use of SARS can be easily linked to one of the major ethical theories. For instance, there are arguments closely linked to deontological theories, or principlist theories, or capabilities approaches, or care ethical approaches. We also identified a multitude of ethical issues that were discussed in this philosophical ethical literature, going from the autonomy issue, the privacy issue, the dignity issue, changed care concept. When we look to these results or to these argumentations, we can make a distinction between two groups. On the one hand are the argumentations who are linked to deontological or principlist approaches to these linked to typical universalist approach in ethics and what is characteristic for these argumentations, that they take a rather top-down approach. That means they try to develop moral rules to judge some more linked to the capability approach or care ethical approaches. And they are more linked to what we call the ethical particularist tradition in ethics. The ethical particularist tradition in ethics, what should be distinguished from relativist ethics, of course. Context wherein SARs are embedded. So they are not reflecting in universal terms, but they are starting from the context wherein the problem is situated. Technology in these approaches is not considered as ethical, and we identified 23 publications on the attitudes of older adults with regard to SARs. Publications were published between 2010 and 2016, what makes clear how new this field is. There were four strong moral intuitions identified, and safety issue and the financial economic aspects were discussed in these empirical studies. But besides this literature review, we also did an original qualitative study last year, 2018, in Flanders, and we included 59 cognitively intact older citizens in Flanders, and they were divided over 9 focus groups. And we used the SAR ALICE in order to provoke and to stimulate the discussions, and the research question was, what do you think about the use of SARs like ALICE, and what are your ethical opinions, your ethical intuitions about these SARs? In the results, we could identify 3 main themes very relevant for the ethics and the ethical reflection on SARs. First theme is SAR as part of a techno-societal evolution. The second is the embeddedness of SARs in aged care dynamics. And the third is SARs as embodiments of ethics. First, SARs as part of a techno-societal evolution. All the older persons who were interviewed in Flanders said that, according to them, SARs are unavoidable. That means that SARs are considered as the result of a technological. We have no choice. They will come. We cannot stop them. That were the feelings when SARs. There are also difficulties in older adults' life. For instance, they refer to the weak social cohesion of family and society. Our children have no time for us and have no time to care for us, so we need SARs. And they also refer to loneliness. The second theme that came up in this qualitative study was that SARs are embedded in current aged care practices or aged care dynamics. And here we had a very nice discussion about SARs as replacers of human caregivers, substitutes of nurses, for instance, or should they be considered as supporters of caregivers and older adults? The first option that brings to care for each other. We don't need SARs, we need humans. We need human beings who care for each other. And the older adults are also saying that the care by SARs will miss something. The human touch will not be there. But on the other hand, there were older persons who said, yes, but another person said that SARs are more accurate than humans. For instance, then they are not liable for negative emotions like fatigue or behaving disrespectful. SARs are very mixed. On the other hand, SARS as supporters, and the majority of the people or participants were arguing for this, that SARS should be considered as supporting instrument, supporting the older adults. It can make that older adults can stay at home because they can provide physical and cognitive support. They give them a feeling of security, and they provide social support. Again, SARS is better than nothing. But they can also support the caregivers with routine tasks, as was explained yesterday, for instance. But they can also positive evolution of all according to the older adults. SARS, and that is the third theme, are also considered as embodiments of ethical intuitions. And here there are three things that came up, namely the autonomy issue, the privacy issue, and the social visitors at home. There is no need for a SAR who is monitoring everything. I cannot cognitively start or turn off the SAR. An important issue that came in the discussions was that SARS can never order or force the older adult to do something. Of course, also the privacy issue was important, and the social justice issue. What will the cost of the SAR, and who will pay for it? Will SARS something cared for by machines, SARS? During the discussions, there were also interesting things that were mentioned, and that I didn't find in the philosophical literature. For instance, the environmental impact of SARS. There was one of the participants who was an engineer who said, yes, SARS, we need minerals. This morning also, they come from the third world. And so what are the working conditions in the mines of Congo, for instance? They start with criticizing our society, and they start with criticizing care practices. So that means that according to the older adults, ethical thinking, ethical reflection with regards to SARS should be embedded in a social historical context, and historical context that gives rise to the development of SARS. What is that social historical contextualization, as we named it? Well, to say it briefly, on the societal level, older adults say that SARS can enough human beings to care for each other, then that is a condition where we can use SARS. That is on the societal level. The second level, organizational care level, there the older adults say that SARS should be considered as support instruments and not as substitutes for human caregivers. And then third, on the relational level, the micro level, when we use SARS in this way, then SARS cannot be forced upon older adults. It should be based on informed consent, and the older adults should have the possibility to turn off the SARS when they like to do that. So this is the social from this enterprise, this dialogue between the empirical and the philosophical literature. So what we learned till now is that we cannot judge over SARS from a universal theoretical point of view. We should take into account the particularities. So we should take into account the lived experiences and the moral intuitions, because they express important human wisdom, the resistances, the hopes that a very important emancipatory power, because older adults' voices should be heard. The older adults are the first stakeholders who will experience the impact, the positive impact, but also the negative impact of the use of SARS. adults, that is what we learned, opened a lot of new dimensions on taking responsibility. For instance, they mentioned the environmental impact, and they were also talking about the criticism towards society and the criticism towards care practices. Before we start with talking about the ethical things of privacy or autonomy or safety, etc., etc. Second, what we learned is that society as a whole, the citizens, but also the church, and therefore I'm so happy that the Academy is organizing this workshop because it is an exercise of an interpretative dialogue. That is what we are doing these days. And in that interpretative dialogue, the lived experiences and the attitudes of all stakeholders should be taken seriously and should be taken into account. Third, and lastly, we should be aware that the technological evolution and SARS are a result of that technological evolution, that it is not only something that is unavoidable, it is not the result of a technological imperative that we can't stop. No, the technological evolution is a result of SARS are very complex. They are multi-layered. There are also many scripts of SARS possible. We can develop them in many different ways. That means that we have choices, and we can choose for this option and not for that option. So we are responsible how we will develop these SARS and how we will introduce them in aged care. But therefore, we need a permanent and critical always based or should always be based on anthropological, theological, and philosophical presuppositions. Therefore, I think it's important that the lectures of yesterday learned us that there should be ethics also in engineering, and there should be for engineers because they have an enormous impact on our society, and they should be aware of that impact. So they should be capable to reflect from a philosophical development. As SARS are socio-historically embedded, we do have power over them. And that means that robotic care practices should be considered as practices of responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Desmond, for this wonderful lecture and the perfect timing in which you delivered it as well. It is now my privilege to introduce Dr. Barbara Bass. Dr. Bass just finished serving as president, her term as president of the American College of Surgery. She is now, of course, the immediate past president, so one of the most preeminent figures in American medicine today, for sure. Dr. Bass is the chair at the Houston Methodist Hospital, where she's also a professor of surgery, where in the connection with the Michael Medical College in New York. She's also the founder and executive director of the Institute for Technology, Innovation, and Education, which, among other things, specializes in the education and practicing professionals on the use of surgical robotics. Thank you very much, Dr. Bass. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Hours listening to these presentations, and I will say, as a surgeon who's now in my 40th year of practice, I've spent most of my days meeting a patient in the morning and taking them to the operating room and doing what I do with them with all best intent. But I do think it's this kind of environment here offers me the opportunity to do some multi-scale thinking into the things that are behind that daily practice of mine. And it also lets me reflect on the research that I've done in my career, which basically has focused on this incredible transformation of surgery from a fingers and flesh to safely in the States. And how do we build infrastructure policy as we also participate in the co-creation of these technologies, many of which are computer enabled and therefore gathering all of that data, which is ultimately going to lead to the capacity to do autonomous robotic surgery in this digital age. The process of surgery, being the patient with the body in need of an intervention, or repair of an injured or failing part, removal of an infected or invasive element, or at times a replacement of a failed organ, seeks the help of another, a skilled and knowledgeable stranger, a surgeon. That surgeon uses her or his hands and tools, coupled with skills, knowledge, wisdom, and experience to effect the remedy, the invasive operation with inherent risks and benefits. That patient sleeps silently on a metal table in a room filled with other capable strangers. Nurses, technicians, and anesthetists all gathered as a team to perform the operation. The human trust in this experience is remarkable, both for the surgeon, who inherently causes harm with the intervention, and relies on the patient's body to heal, and for the patient. This, to me, is the most uniquely of human expressions of trust. The experience of surgery for the surgeon has long included a sense of tactile contact with the patient, the warmth of human tissue, a sure sign of life. Those of us who felt that life go away and felt the body go cold know it very well. Surgeon knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and disease states guide the hands of the surgeon. Increasingly, however, mechanical devices span the space between surgeon hand and the patient's body, as shown here in the upper corner with laparoscopy, or below with the so-called robotic surgery, with the surgeon sitting at a console remote from the patients at the bedside table. This leaves only visual clues to guide a procedure at the cost of tactile guidance and connection. In fact, over the last 2 decades is now typically augmented by new technologies, as I mentioned, including computer-aided surgery, imaging technology to allow augmented visualization, and devices to enable precision of the surgical movements at remote sites. This interfacing technology is utilized at the cost of the surgeon's tactile contact with the patient's body. And surgeon is really not yet known. Will surgeons still feel the bond of human connection with their patients when a machine is placed between them? The potential challenges of technology and computer-aided surgery are many. This bridging technology introduces the possibility of mechanical or computational failure, necessitating that surgeons not only be facile with the modern interface technologies, but also a master in open conventional surgery. Perhaps an overly ambitious expectation of surgeon competency going forward. We also heard of adoption into fluent competent practice. Where do surgeons train in new technologies during those 40 years of practice? And how do we achieve this fluency of skill in the actual practice environment of surgery? How do our patients knowingly participate in the process of safe adoption? In this discussion, we will consider the current state of robotic technologies and computation in surgery with an eye to the ethical perspective as best as I'm capable of. First, we will define current robotic technologies in surgery and the risks and benefits they present to patients and their impact on the patient-surgeon relationship. We'll exhaust robotic surgery training necessitated by adoption of this or any disruptive innovative technology. Challenges to autonomous robotic platforms in the setting of highly variable human anatomy and physiology, and the limitations of present technologies to re-register during procedural interventions. How do these factors inform the development of robotic surgery platforms capable of autonomous performance? In what settings would autonomous function, absent real-time surgeon engagement, be justifiable? Last, we'll consider the evolving body of research known as computational surgery This field uses computational methods coupled to our understanding of human biology and evolving technologies and computer-enabled healthcare, hard sciences, imaging, robotics, modeling to enhance the process of surgery. The field may enable predictive modeling of surgical disease, surgeon and patient decision-making. This field is fundamental to new development, autonomous and mainly autonomous function. A fully programmed device that is capable of independently navigating a task based on accumulated data sets and precise and adaptable programming. As a surgeon, I'm very pleased to dispel this notion of robotics in current practice of surgery. So-called robotic surgery in current form is not performed by an autonomous robotic system, I trust you know, but rather is a computer-enabled system which provides an intervening set of technologies to manipulate surgical tools under the direct control of a surgeon, admittedly sitting across the room, or perhaps across the sea. The so-called robotic surgery systems in current practice are remote control facilitating systems. In robotic surgery systems currently in use in many surgical disciplines in high-income nations around the globe include the chest, abdominal, pelvic, oncologic, orthopedic, neurologic, and ophthalmologic systems. In every application, the robotic system facilitates the principle of precision surgery. Access sites, augmented visualization, including magnification, precision of motion, and procedural manipulation in areas not accessible to human hands armed with conventional instruments. And in some cases, image guidance to sites of disease not visible to surface visualization. These are good things. While the surgeon may be seated at a console adjacent to the patient and may touch the patient only by these remotely manipulated devices, the surgeon is fundamentally the decision maker and the performer of the procedure. Patients' confusion over this modality is routinely noted by surgeons who have embraced robotic technologies in their practices, whose patients often inquire as to whether the robot or the surgeon herself will be performing the procedure. The ethical challenges inherent in the current robotic platforms are not, however, insignificant. At the most fundamental level, surgery is a human-to-human agreement of an exceptional sort. Unlike many other forms of healthcare agreements between physicians and patients, surgery intrinsically comes with patient harm, wounds that must heal, inherent risk of unpreventable at times complications, and of course pain. When placing a technology between surgeon hand and patient body, one relinquishes a certain degree of control to technology. Both parties must agree that the benefits of this technology and reliability of the technology is a positive factor in the risk associated with any procedure. In skilled and experienced hands and in well-resourced environments, reliability of robotic surgery systems and surgeon performance justifies this insertion of an enabling technology for certain procedures. However, an enabling technology, as mentioned, does intrinsically separate the surgeon from the tactile connection with that patient. This separation, despite professional commitments, has the potential to bring an emotional separation from the responsibility for the patient's outcomes. The devices do, although rarely, fail. Surgeons trained in the recent past have benefited from extensive periods of training encompassing a broad scope of patient contact. Their hands know the warmth of the human body, and I believe embrace their very personal responsibility for the patient's welfare. One can envision, however, that with ever-expanding development of remote-controlled technologies, coupled to image-based diagnostics which diminish the requirement for physical examination, and even perhaps much human discussion, that surgeons may be challenged to affirm that personal bond and responsibility that a surgeon must feel for a surgical patient they treat. It will be an ethical challenge to ensure that going forward, as technology separates a surgeon from his or her patients, the preservation of the responsibility that surgeons feel for their patients, that human bond is preserved at the highest level. Another confounding element of the current robotic system, surgery, is or any other impending technology, is the challenge of safe adoption and dissemination of the technology. Without doubt, remote control, computer-enabled surgery is a certain component of the future of surgery around the globe. Such platforms will be increasingly available to surgeons and healthcare systems as the manufacturers develop next generation, less costly systems. Each technology, however, comes with potential disruption in surgeon performance. Every new procedure, every technology must be acquired with training pathways that recognize the imperative of protecting patients from harm of the surgeon learning curve. Use of simulation, non-human-based training to proficiency prior to use in patients, proctoring of surgeons during early adoption periods, and a commitment to track outcomes of procedures in the patients who've been treated with robotic technologies is essential, and I might add, lacking. Such infrastructure throughout the developed world is completely underdeveloped, as evidenced by the historical, noted here, and ongoing patterns of patient harm associated with premature adoption of novel technologies over the last 2.5 decades. The extraordinary pace of technological advancement has on occasion fueled patient harm and the rush to adopt new devices and technologies in all disciplines of surgery. Infrastructure and processes for oversight to ensure consistent patient safety associated with disruptive technology dissemination. Interestingly, premature adoption is often stimulated by a misconceived perception of the public, the patients, that novel surgical technologies are intrinsically better, driving patients, in fact, to seek out providers who are early adopters, a process that in the past has led to premature adoption of novel technologies before surgeon training and clinical infrastructure was sufficient for patient safety. We as members of the surgical community bear an ethical imperative to ensure that surgeons and systems who embrace new technologies, including robotic systems, have developed processes and infrastructure, urging retooling and safe adoption practices to minimize the risk of patient harm and to optimize for patient benefit, regardless of financial drivers. In the United States, until recently, the responsibility for training surgeons in practice in new technology has often been borne by the technology industry that manufactures the new robotic technology system platforms. While the effort by industry to fully and adequately train the adopters of While the effort of industry to fully and adequately train the adopters of new commercial technologies have often been thoughtful, has not uniformly resulted in adequate training prior to utilization of robotic platforms in human surgery. It is, of course, however, the responsibility of surgeons to ensure that they are skilled and proficient prior to using any robotic platforms in their surgical practices. Houston Methodist Hospital, a place called MIGHTY, the Methodist Institute for Technology, Innovation, and Education. It's incorporated sophisticated simulation-based training platforms to deliver robotic surgery, laparoscopic surgery, thoracoscopic surgery, and other disciplines. To date, we've hosted over 13,000 surgeons in practice during that 40-year increment, and retooling technology is sufficient prior to using these technologies in our operating rooms for our patients. Priority. Autonomous robotic systems today. Formation of knowledge sets that can guide decision-making pathways for autonomous robotic systems. From the procedural perspective, predictable patterns of disease expression, such as this small melanoma, the irregularities of small surface landmarks, or luminal findings, can be, in theory, assembled to design and execute an autonomous, simple procedural intervention. Such interventions on small-scale, immobile, and surface-based lesions is conceivable and approaching deliverability by certain technology industries at this moment. The risk of error and complication is limited. Ability are low in these simpler examples of surgery. However, the expansion of autonomous robotic systems to areas of greater procedural complexity remains a daunting computational and technological challenge, and furthermore, a greater ethical challenge. Human anatomy is consistent, yet actually highly variable when expressed in each human form. Disease states further deform the predictability of human structures. This deformity is also highly mutable during the actual performance of the procedure, or mobilized, removed, or restructured, making machine learning algorithms far too complex for autonomous robotic systems in the abdomen, chest, or pelvis. While machine learning may foster uniform and predictable surgical interventions, a human in the loop, a surgeon, to reinterpret to variability and contemporaneous change in the patient's condition remains essential for complex procedures and surgery. Conditions where autonomous robotic systems could be justifiable from the ethical perspective include those settings in which harm to the surgeon or the healthcare team is intrinsically potentially life-threatening or logistically impossible. Examples include care of battle zone injured soldiers, remote inaccessible environments, including space exploration, or in disease conditions where risk of contamination to the healthcare team is a high risk. Regrettably, the life-threatening conditions in these zones are often complex conditions as well. What is computational surgery? It's a relatively recently articulated discipline that brings the tools of the computational sciences, mathematics, computer science, to the process of surgery. This discipline, in part, includes modeling and simulation of biological processes and procedural interventions to predict surgical outcomes, real-time augmented visualization to enhance surgical procedures to foster precision surgery, multi-scale modeling of surgical disease with integration of patient-specific data and procedural planning, and lastly, real-time assessment of surgeon performance. Computational surgery as a discipline is central to the development of precision surgery. Precision surgery thematically advances the process of surgery based on 4 characteristics: minimal access approaches, keyhole incisions are natural areas of the body in need of the procedure. Image guidance is utilized to foster a more focused and direct approach to the disease state. Augmented visualization is utilized to enhance visibility using magnification. Remote camera approaches or other technologies, and computer-enabled, as in the use of robotic technologies, which enable a surgeon to perform a procedure with remotely controlled tools to augment the visualization. Prediction of the results of procedural interventions are often not as accurate as one would wish for in a specific individual patient. Nonetheless, as with pharmacological therapies for malignancy, we have learned that greater incorporation of accurate patient-specific data can inform the therapeutic choices and offer superior methods for prediction of outcome of therapeutic. We've learned that precision medicine, the use of molecularly targeted agents for particular treatment of disease, has found its greatest success when coupled with patient-specific, tumor-specific markers rather than generalized disease-specific markers. For example, only breast cancer patients with overexpression of the EGF receptor can respond to HER2-targeted therapy. And boy, did they respond. Once we can measure patient-specific markers, we can offer validated precision approach to therapy. The benefits of precision modeling in surgery is substantially different from the clearly beneficial role of offering precise therapy for a known molecular malignancy. In computational surgery model, the objective is to provide guiding prediction of outcome to inform the patient of possible outcomes. What types of success can one anticipate from a planned surgical procedure? However, given the complexity of factors that contribute to the sexual outcomes of surgery, the mathematics and our data sets today are limited. An example of the application of computational modeling to a surgical condition is provided in the disease of breast cancer. Women diagnosed with breast cancer face the need to make many choices during their care. Many of these choices are informed by data, the molecular features of their tumor, stage of disease, underlying medical conditions, family history, genetic risk. However, one primary choice to be made is whether to pursue breast-conserving therapy with the procedure of breast lumpectomy coupled to radiation treatment of the breast, or to undergo surgical removal of the total breast. Many factors, particularly the choice of the woman influences this decision. One element that remains a challenge is predicting the outcome of the procedure of breast lumpectomy and radiation on the physical outcome of these therapies. Well, it's well known that patients with early that have breast conserving therapy is equivalent to total mastectomy to cure the women's breast cancer. We do not have a reliable model to predict the impact of breast conserving therapy on the cosmesis of the breast. The goal of breast conserving therapy is both to spare the woman the deforming consequences of mastectomy and a major surgery, but also to preserve a breast with satisfactory cosmetic result for the patient to feel satisfied and whole after her treatment. Using breast imaging coupled to virtual breast lumpectomy models to describe the surface contour of the breast while completing the process of breast conserving therapy. While 70% of women will have an excellent result of arm mobility and comfort, up to 30% of women may have less satisfactory results. The goal of predictive modeling is to inform the patient of anticipated results, to aid the patient with decision-making relative to her surgical choice. Scale modeling of mechanical and tissue factors, stress, gravity, or operative and discomfort model is demonstrated in this series of figures. Here are the mathematical equations behind it. In a preliminary cohort of patients, we've shown that this modeling can be a reliable predictive tool. One can envision that the routine application of data capture and machine learning would amplify the validity of these models in the wide spectrum of patients with breast-conserving therapy and lead to the development of autonomous decision-making and procedural planning to optimize results. Coupled to devices, human-guided or autonomous robotic technologies, a predictable lumpectomy based on patient-specific imaging, virtual lumpectomy surgery with model with predictable and satisfactory results. In conclusion, fundamentally surgery virtual box. In conclusion, fundamentally surgery is an exquisitely human exchange. A highly trained, experienced surgeon using their skill and knowledge to benefit the health of another by performing a procedure on their body. Both patient and surgeon take on risk. The patient who consents to the service of the surgeon and the surgeon who commits to the procedure, however enabled by technology to aid that patient. Current advances in surgical technology increasingly place technologies between the surgeon and the patient, and the development of autonomous robotic technologies to supplant the human factor are certainly in our future. We must recognize that technology failures are inevitable, and such failures harm not only the patient, but also cause emotional harm to the surgeon. Technology interfaces that enter the space between this human bond must be crafted and deployed in a manner that places the highest priority on patient safety and the moral principle and practice of serving as a physician. Advances in computational methods, including the creation of predictive models of surgical diseases and outcomes of procedures, may offer opportunities to inform the process of surgery in the years ahead. The introduction of autonomous robotic technologies must be fully informed by the goal of ensuring patient health and yet recognized in service and personal responsibility for well-being and the outcomes of their care. And thank you again for the invitation.
As demonstrated by the large number of questions that have flown in, we are thankful for those as well, and we look forward to having a full half hour of discussion, which may eat into your coffee break a little bit. So I will apologize for that. But so here we go. And I see there are more questions coming in. If I may, there is a cluster of questions that has to do with data. Who owns the data that may be used for beneficial reasons? So the case is made, examples are given of the fact that has been shown by multiple groups internationally. If you collect enough data, you feed it into a public AI type of system. And the recommendations that come from that AI system can be used for improving healthcare. So we got three questions on that. Should Europe do the same? As it has been done in China? Who owns the data of the patients? Is it morally acceptable to force the patients to give up their data for the common good?
I have 1 hour.
Yeah. You can stay here as long as you would like.
So, of course, as China, I think there was clear enough with the social score and citizen score system that this would be against the dignity to score the patient in a way that living opportunities are allocated according to how you be on the street or you be on the web, with messages you send and so on. So, but who owns the data is not so easy to answer because you have to distinguish between personal and non-personal data. Personal data belong to the person to whom the data refer, but it is not in a strict sense kind of an ownership where you can sell it easily and you can exclude someone from impacting on it. So we have to find models where you can give your data if you want to make someone else profit from that, let's say the healthcare system. That's why I mentioned data trustees and other data partnerships and so on, so that there are institutionalized frameworks where you can give your data, they are anonymized ideally. And the question then is, if you can sell them, if you can get something back. And I think that's a problem if we try to sell data on an individual basis. Because then you have an incentive to give away your personal data. And then who will do that? Of course, the poor. And why should we discriminate against the poor and implementing incentives to discriminate against them or to put them at a higher danger and risk to have their privacy violated? So there should not be a privacy divide in society. And with not personalized data, you get the partner there to decide whether, for example, the company who built the technology will get the data, or if the one where the technology is built in and runs, let's say, the machine owns the data. So the company with the machine has the data, or another company who provided the sensors. Yeah? And this is a struggle on the European level. It's not clear yet who will have access to the data. It's more linked to contracts. So you discuss what to do with this data, but there are evolving data platforms also on the European level where those data are collected and distributed according to specific contracts. So I think the notion and concept of data ownership will not solve the problem. It raises more problems than it solves. We need other concepts. Third question is to force patients. Well, yeah, not legally, at least not personal data. But what about anonymized data given by default in a healthcare system that is run on a solidary basis? Yeah, why do I have the right to take the money of someone else to have healthcare and not contribute to future generations and to better health? Of course, there are a lot of things to respect and to take into account because privacy has to be guaranteed and autonomy has to be guaranteed. There must be some form of consent, and we first have to have a societal debate whether this is really done in consensus and in a solidary way. But I think, at least from an ethical point of view, there is a kind of a moral claim that you provide the data to bring progress and foster progress.
Thank you. I may keep you with a couple of additional questions that I also put me. One is it your observations that the humans are learning from machines, from robots, from technologies, imitating the ways of doing things that we associate with robots, such as learning repetitive actions to do in a certain way, or learning to do without thinking? That is the question that we discussed. So does it work the other way around too? Are you?
Question. So yes, I think we can probably learn from systems that find new ways of being efficient. So then we can think about imitating that. But I think the other way around, it makes more sense to ask, honestly, because what competencies do we lose when having things done by robots? So imagine situations where you have complex systems run by robotic systems, and all of a sudden they don't work anymore. Do you have the competences to go in there and to solve the problem? So we really have to think about which consequences we are ready to give away. Or which competences we really want to keep for ourselves, either for ethical reasons, because we think that human relationship is so valuable and so important that we shall keep it, or manual capacities or cognitive capacities, which we will not be seen substituted for robots.
Thank you very much. Chris, if I may, you have a big stack of questions right here. Shall we experiment with a rapid fire machine gun approach? I can see because I got a lot of questions for you. Some of them may be faster than others. And so let me start with these. It says that does an informed consent justify ethically if we are offering a robot its company to another person? The fact that can you just sign an informed consent that doesn't solve the ethical issues, or isn't the ethical problem already intrinsic in the fact that we have offered a robot as opposed to offering a person or doing what is morally required of us, which is to offer companionship and walking in the journey with the person who suffered?
Yeah, well, I don't think that the informed consent as such is alone enough to introduce the robot. But and also it depends on how you consider informed consent. It is not something, a paper that is signed by the older entity. And it should be a process that should continuously renewed. So it is not dependent from one decision at a certain moment of the older concept. And so we should not consider it as some legal form or whatever, but more as a communication process. And also to have feedback from the older person with the experience of the robot, so that it can always adapt on his position or so I would not apply here a reductionistic view on because that is not.
The offering of the technology is supposed to be offered to the person that supports is that intrinsically more of a flaw. What do we think about that?
I think we cannot say yes or no from a general point of view. It always depends on the circumstances where it is introduced and how it is introduced, but what role it can play in the aged care situation. So you should always go into the particularity. In the particular situation where older adults can have use of robots or not. It always depends on.
Thank you. Now, you used the word embodiment in your presentation on a number of occasions. Could you clarify how you're using that word, what it means, especially in a theological and philosophical context?
Embodiment, as it is used here, means that the robots are not just neutral material, because they have very intimate interactions with human beings. And so in that sense, they are not just a piece of matter, but they are interacting with older adults. What means that they have in a certain way some kind of body, or at least experience in a certain way as a body. To sealed off, then you see that the way how other adults prefer a more humanized role, and they have reasons for that. For instance, the older adults who prefer a machine-like robot, they say, well, we know that it is a machine, not a human being, and that should be clear. Therefore, we like other adults, they say, yes, for us it is very important that it looks like a human being because it creates some intimate relationship, etc. So the body is important.
We have spoken a lot about using this AI for the elderly. Are there additional ethical considerations that pertain to using them for the care of, say, children with autistic disorders?
Yeah, I'm not done, and it is also very popular in pediatric work. For instance, care for small children with autism. I think that it can have advantages for treatment of these children, and many of them very like the Zora robot. But on the other hand, we should be critical because there is always an aspect of deception in the use of robots. So, for instance, that children think that it is like a human being is not. That is also an issue in use of robots with incompetent patients or dependent patients for it. The issue is can we deceive these people? Because then they consider robots as a real human being. Is that actually acceptable that we make that possible? And so I think also for children the same.
Thank you. The next set of questions has to do with the human. We're going to be closing at about 15 after the hour. So if there are more questions they need to come in, by all means, send them in. I expect we could have a discussion of the healthcare provider relationship and the various facets of that relationship, a consideration such as do we expect that will become less and less important in the community perception of what the fundamental role of the doctor is. By injecting technology, that's the overall notion I think that we all share, that going to a doctor is also a human experience, not only a technical experience. Will that evolve over time with the different expectations from people? We train in society.
Permanently and critically reflect on that. What is the caring relationship? What is good with the caring relationship, and how will we keep it for that? In that sense, I think there is something like a consensus, and robots, for instance, in some care cannot be considered as substitute. Also, the older adults say we prefer robots as support instruments. So the caring relationship will be very, very important. But of course, it is also partly the result of a choice. What do we, as a society, what should be robots. And what does that mean, for instance, for care practice? As I said, if our nurses are obliged to provide care always under time pressure, so that they behave or they deal with their patients as robots, then we should not be surprised.
Many technologies will be involved in the patient. It was talking to medicine many times. And then the technology came and speaking with background. So then now technology is used. But now technology is over some tasks of doctors or nurses. And now you get confusion that they have more time to do with patients. Talk again more with them, but they do not learn that, and the system is not adequate to cover that. And what I'm afraid of is the technology. Yeah, so it is just important that we know that we are responsible for shaping the system, and this has to begin and start with education of doctors.
It's very easy at times to dismiss the personal passion and commitment that physicians bring to their role as healers. It is a very real calling for most people in scientific practice. We need to embrace that, cultivate that, and make sure that we don't introduce so much extra nonsense into their education. That actually, as a surgeon, I think that we actually have a very special place in that very human connection. And that what we do is a one-on-one experience. You know, a physician, I don't dismiss the role of other physicians, but they can try lots of things over and over and over and over again at different medicines, different this, and that. Not what we do. And I think that patients, if we have a real one-on-one, very intense. I don't know a single surgeon who doesn't really value that one-on-one sense of responsibility. We really, we incorporate that very much in our training. Still to this day, that's a real important premise. Informed consent, that communication, that care for the patient throughout that episode of care. It's a big deal. I don't. I do see that there are other disciplines where that requirement for that intense one-shot opportunity is missing, where it's actually integrated.
Thank you. And my observation is that the number one concern that I hear most often, not the last physical definition from doctors, is that they spend more and more time right now looking at computer screens and entering data or comments as opposed to looking at the patient in the eye. So there is, in a sense, a result of technologies, but perhaps even more dominantly so, is the result of a societal evolution towards efficiencies, which bring the benefit, of course, of a better, more efficient delivery of healthcare. But on the flip side of that, they of course they really erode the ability to spend time with patients. So this is a societal proposition. There is not only within education is a big component, but it really behooves all of us because of the societal focus on the mighty dollar, I would say, in the United States, that forces someone who's erosion of the time spent with quality personal care. Dr. Tomas, while I have you there, may I ask you a few quick questions? One is, what is the difference in cost between robotic surgery and surgery done in a normal way with the scalpel in hand?
Well, it's considerable. It really depends on how busy you keep that robotic device, but robotic devices cost about $2 to $3 million. If you keep them busy, if you use them all day, every day, which is one of the reasons why we kind of get pressure to use them fully, they actually are roughly equivalent to the case to the OP procedures. However, in most institutions, that's not the case. So there's an incremental add-on, probably of about somewhere between 50 and 100% of the cost. And that's why at this point it's obviously restricted to really those wealthier healthcare systems that are healthcare.
Which pushes healthcare decline in many ways, which is a similar problem.
Although we're getting the learning curve down on the road.
Okay. Is it conceivable that there will be malicious hacking of surgical robots? Somebody maliciously interfering with the controls so as to hurt somebody? How do we defend against that? Would that be ethical?
It's actually one of those items that points up that comes in on every single discussion about robotic surgery or any kind of computer-aided surgery. And it can be, it's hard to imagine at this point with current technology that actually intercept and manipulate the instruments, although it fortunately makes. And at this point, that's possible.
You've spoken about autonomous robotic surgery, given the example of extreme conditions. But south of that, staying in a regular everyday practice, what are the biggest drivers, the killer applications for wanting to develop autonomous surgery?
Well, I think the area where we will see it first will be in simple procedures. And those will be things where the technical expertise and the variability and anatomy are minimized. So things like skin operations. In fact, we practically already have it in things like basic surgery. That's practically autonomous surgery based on the programming that goes into it. But that's relatively simple at times. And areas where perhaps we can get greater efficiency out of a robotic approach, as an image-guided robotic approach, for example, sampling columns and doing mucosal biopsies in certain types of conditions. But in terms of the more complex procedures, the variability in anatomy, although we think it's all the same, is extreme, and we're not doing it.
Can you speak a little bit about remote surgery? Of course, we have seen some pretty visible examples of that, but it doesn't seem to have taken hold as much. Or has it? What do you see?
It certainly has not taken availability of, if you have that kind of laparoscopic technology, generally you have the infrastructure there to handle it. So it's applicable to image-guided, technologically enabled surgeries. Where we see it going, and one of the limitations in application, for example, in war zones or certainly in space travel, there's actually still an intrinsic lag. You know, there's about it takes even a 2/10 of a second is enough to disrupt your telepresence and manipulation. Where we're seeing it really being utilized, though, some countries that are now being able to link by virtue of especially soon 5G, but the need to live on the cellular web, we can actually help provide real-time consultation to surgeons in low-resource environments or remote environments. And it's really taking off in a major way, educational and point-of-care ask for help kind of phenomena, which is really a very fabulous intervention. But the operator is at the local site, not the
Thank you. For the last 5 minutes, I have a series of questions, 4 exactly, which I think are for everybody. So just toss them out in the air if anybody is interested in grabbing them. And the first question is, do robots have a soul? Where is the soul of the robot?
No.
No. No. 2 for 3 is no.
I think the interesting question will be when robots are developed in a way that there are so many sensors and circular networks and possibilities to express something, not themselves, well, something in the face. And Sophia has already more than 60 possibilities of shaping the face. And how can we detect whether this entity has a soul or not? So we just presume that every one of us has a soul. Yes, that's our image of humankind and our experience. But just take the situation that an entity is coming along looking like a human being. And how will you see that this is not a human being?
You want to say that with the microphone, or shall we? All right. The second question for everybody, is it the first step? Do you think is the taking care of the protection of those that actually extract the minerals that are necessary for making the devices. Is that the paramount, the first order of ethical problems?
Is at least a very important aspect that is mostly neglected in the longer ethical discussions about robots. But we should take the global perspective and the global aspect. The impact on the environment should be taken into account, and also the impact or what it produces for workers in the countries where they have to work in the mine or the minerals. All these things, the working conditions, all these things should be taken into account because it is part of the story. And it should be balanced with the other so we cannot neglect it.
Thank you.
I think it's definitely an issue of global justice and of sustainability. And as far as I know, the International Bioethics Committee and Health is, as far as I know, the only report who has a chapter on that, with recommendations to international agencies, by the way.
On the question of the losses of jobs that are associated with robots coming in and doing the jobs for humans, can we look at it in a different way, say less work hours are needed and we spread them around more evenly, that people can have more vacation time? You like that?
I could question because we dealt with it in the European Robotic.
Yes.
So yes, these two things. First, we didn't see that there will be a major loss of jobs, which is not balanced by a gain of jobs on the other side. There will be different jobs. We have to have individual and societal upskilling and so on. But we saw that Germany had the most robots, but it gained jobs in that area. Yeah. Robots didn't destroy jobs. So, but there are questions coming up with regard to the social security systems and platform economies. So technologies foster unusual employment schemes, and they're not covered by social security systems in an adequate way, and the power play between employers and employees is not covered as well because we don't have institutions for that. So we have to move forward there, and we have to see that social security is not only the right of workers or employees, but there are citizen rights. So we have to decouple, not on short notice, but in the long run, we have to decouple social security systems from the employment system so that everyone can benefit from social security. And of course, we could start a societal discussion on other institutionalized things such as unconditional basic income or so. So I will not advertise now for that system, but at least we should talk about it or other forms of engagement.
But it would seem that it would also offer an opportunity if we use robotics not so much in healthcare, but in other domains where we could really do away with those dangerous or harmful kind of automatized jobs. We would free up a whole cohort of people who are actually entered into the human field of healthcare and providing services to the elderly. Maybe we should focus our robotic efforts on the human-facing aspects of the technology.
Following up on these lines, SARS may be seen as taking the jobs or potential jobs of migrants coming in from less privileged areas of the world. So by promoting the deployment of SARS, are we not working against the social justice in a global sense?
We should be cautious. I think that if it produces jobs or if we lose jobs with production of stuff. The question is where the jobs and human caregivers will be used, because there is a risk for a divide between poor and rich people. For instance, there can be an option that the rich people, they can afford human care provided by human beings, human touch, quality care. And that poor people, they should, and so the rich people can stay at home with human caregivers. And the poor people, they should go to a nursing home. There, robots are doing most of the work. So that is a critical question. Where do we use the human caregivers, and where are we going to use the SARS?
Well, thank you very much. This has been a wonderful session. Yes, just a moment, please. We have a couple of announcements by Father Ciucci, including the fact that we are starting the faculty part, correct?
Chiedo scusa, abbiate pazienza un attimo. Gli accademici, questa sera c'è la cena, è programmata la cena sociale, vedete già la mappa, perfetto, e la cena è presso l'ordine, questo è Santo Sepolcro, riuscite a vedere, credo, dov'è l'entrata, l'edificio è della conciliazione, ma l'entrata è alle ore 20. Ricordo che la cena è riservata agli accademici e a un eventuale collaboratore, accompagnatore, la moglie, il marito, ci mancherebbe. Eccoci, questa è la prima cosa. Seconda cosa, domani abbiamo la messa in San Pietro, la messa per gli accademici, ma se qualcuno dei partecipanti al workshop desidera partecipare alla messa è naturalmente invitato. Attenzione perché domani c'è anche l'udienza in piazza San Pietro, quindi c'è un po' di caos nei dintorni della piazza. L'ingresso, avremo un ingresso riservato, vedete la porta del Perugino, la vedete in immagine, che è la stessa che abbiamo usato l'anno scorso, per chi ricorda. Dovremo però entrare tutti insieme e entreremo puntualmente alle 7:30, quindi è opportuno essere lì qualche minuto delle 7:30 in modo tale che possiamo accedere con questo ingresso a riservato. Naturalmente i presbiteri presenti sono invitati a concelebrare